Okay, MPC Key 37. This is a device that's been speculated about, leaked, rumored, etc. for quite a while, and it is now here. I did not get mine from Akai. I did not have it before it was announced. The good folks at zZounds sent this over to me, so shout out to zZounds. Thank you. Now, frankly, this is a device that I wasn't even really sure why it existed at first, but as soon as I started using it, I got it. Like it just clicked immediately. And I think if you know anything about the MPCs, then you're probably thinking the MPC Key 37 is just an MPC 1 Plus with a keyboard. And yeah, basically yes. But the thing is, the MPC 1, and by proxy the MPC 1 Plus, is one of the best bang for your buck music creation devices that's ever been made. And really the only thing a device like that is missing for someone like me who primarily produces with keys is keys. And this thing has that. Not only does it have keys, it has a pretty well thought out front panel design that gives you quick access via the buttons on here to basically every function. Every different MPC since the MPC Live Mark 1 or MPC X Mark 1, but really both of those have essentially been the same platform with the same specs, give or take some RAM, which we'll talk about, and sometimes different IO, but they run the same processor, the same software, the same plugins, and every single different new one, the MPC 1, the MPC Live Mark 2, the MPC XSE, the MPC Key 61, the MPC 1 Plus, and the MPC Key 37, these are all essentially just different form factors for the same platform, with the exception of that RAM difference, like I mentioned. And along with a different form factor, a lot of them have really different pricing structures. So the MPC 1 has been kind of the cheaper option. I've seen them as low as 400, 500 on the used market. I think they retail around 700. The MPC Key 61 at launch was like 18 or 1900, although I've seen it go as low as 1500 new and cheaper in the used market. This guy, the MPC Key 37, retails for $899 or $900 US, which is a really nice sweet spot price, especially when you consider that these will eventually be on the used market and you'll probably end up finding them as cheap as $600 or $700, even at $900, even at the MSRP for this thing. This feels like the best value for what you get of any music creation device I have used in a very long time, maybe ever. Because unless you start talking about something like the Novation Circuit Tracks or something very cheap that does a lot for very little money, you enter the realm of things like the Poly N Play Plus, which is $800, and you're like, why is this $800? I mean, if it worked and stuff and it didn't have all the issues, then maybe, but you put something like the Poly N Play Plus next to an MPC 1 Plus or this MPC Key 37, and you can really just see a difference in what you're getting for your money. And of course, Akai and InMusic are a much larger brand, and so they're able to charge less and produce at scale. And maybe it's not a fair comparison to compare boutique devices to devices made by large manufacturers. But it is impressive what they have put into a $900 device, hardware-wise and software-wise. Now, one of the key things to keep in mind with modern MPCs now is that they aren't just hardware with standard configured software. They're also a platform that hosts custom plugins made by Akai and Air software. That might not be Air's actual name, but all the Air plugins, like the Jura, the Mini D, Fabric XL, OpX4, all of these plugins are pretty cool and pretty powerful, and they all cost additional money. Now, if you buy this thing brand new, I believe you get a voucher for one plugin, and my recommendations kind of vary, but there's 3 real candidates in my opinion. There is Jura, which I think is their best straight up synth. If you just want a classic sounding Juno approximation, that would be my recommendation. OpX4, if you're really into programming, you're comfortable, or you want to learn FM synthesis, there's a lot of possibilities of sound with OpX4 if you want to program, or Fabric XL. I'm not totally sure the voucher will let you choose, but if the voucher lets you choose Fabric XL, that's a pretty good way to build out more organic wave state sounding sounds, and there's a lot of pretty decent presets. So those would be my top recommendations. I have basically every synth plugin. I have the Mini D emulation, I have Jura, Fabric, Stage Piano, Stage Strings, Stage EP. They're all great, but I highly recommend it, and this is true in all of my videos about any music tech that you wait for sales. The software always goes on sale different times of year. find a good deal. I think with these ones specifically, they tend to do one at a time. So you'll see, you know, fabric go from like 200 whatever to like 100 or less. That's when you want to do that, in my opinion, if you're interested in the plugins. If money's not a concern, then by all means, buy whatever you want, whenever you want. But I'm pretty budget conscious when it comes to plugins, so I tend to buy things on sale, whether that's the Arturia V collection when it goes half off, or a Complete Control when it goes half off. I would follow the same principle with the plugins for the MPC. We have now seen this in the time since they've rolled these out. They do go on sale. So yes, they're expensive on paper, but so are most plugins. And these plugins are now supported on VST format and audio unit format, I believe. So they do run on Mac and PC as well. So you're not just buying a plugin stuck on a device anymore, which is cool. This is potentially a shallow topic of conversation, but I actually want to talk about the color because when I first saw it, I was like, I don't like that. I get what they were doing, which I think is kind of emulating the colorway of the Supreme Edition MPC Live 2. That was a pretty cool looking device. Maybe I'll put a picture or something right here, picture of the Supreme. This is also obviously very similar to the MPC 1 Plus, which had a red colorway, although I believe this is a brighter red color. I never used the MPC 1 Plus. I really like this color. I know it's dumb and it's subjective, and there are good arguments for maybe not choosing a super stark color for the only SKU of a device. That would be the only feedback I would give, is like maybe do a retro version of this and a black version of this as well. I hope these sell well like the MPC 1 did, so that they get a bunch of colorways, or the Akai just does a bunch of colors. You could also imagine like a neon yellow or a neon blue, or like, you know, this feels like a platform you could really play with because they've already chosen such a stark color for the first one. Anyway, kind of a, I don't know, not important tech spec topic, but still something I think is interesting. Like this device compared to most of the other MPCs I've used is a really bright, stark color. But something you may know if you've used MPCs a lot is they tend to have like red accents. And instead of red accents, this one has like black accents where the red would be. And I actually think this is so much more tasteful than the red accents on the black devices. For whatever reason, this looks like a cohesive design. Whereas I feel like some of the older MPC designs with black and red accents, they feel a little like cheaper. I don't know how to explain this, and it's all really subjective, I guess. But I'm just gonna say it. I think this is one of the prettiest pieces of music gear I've ever used. I know not every YouTuber and every musician feels this way about this, but I do. I really, really like this design. I like how the buttons are white and how they just pop on this panel, and the text is white for most of the buttons. And when it's not, it helps identify a really key function. Like this is main. You're gonna be on main a lot. Let's load an empty project. You want that button to be stark because it's telling you this is like the most important page. If you're in sounds view, this turns teal blue, which I'm not sure is coming through right now. See if I can get that to show up. It's not very clear, but if you double tap and go to favorites, it's now pink. It's like color coding the functionality of the button. And it's only gonna be teal if you're on a track, if you're on the sounds menu. Otherwise it goes back to a faint glowing white. Sadly, I haven't found a way to make the buttons dimmer. And right now you can see the screen is a little dark. Maybe you can tell, maybe you can't. I have it in night mode because I've been producing a lot at night, and the buttons are very bright. I feel like any device that has light, like glowing buttons like this should let you turn them down. And I think it's something you have to plan from the outset because I think they have to be dimmable. I'm not an expert on this, but I would imagine that isn't something they can fix in post. But if it is, I would love it if Akai made it possible to dim the buttons. This is something the Ableton Push does, I believe, and the Control Mark III lets you dim the LEDs and the screen. And I do really wish that was here. But this is also a much cheaper device, and maybe it's just expensive to allow that kind of flexibility. And I know I mentioned it before, but I really do think price to performance balance is like the key thing about this device that is really cool to me. And one of the first and main thoughts I've had since I got it is I really wish this thing existed 15 years ago when I first really started getting into music production when I was around 15 years old. You know, for half my life now, I've been messing with music software and music hardware and MIDI controllers. And this thing is like an all-in-one device that if I was going to shepherd someone into the journey of music production, God, that was very, I don't know the word for that. That was a little too whatever. But if I was going to get someone started with music production, this device is such a good candidate for that. Now, getting into the MPC workflow, I've said it before, I'll say it again, other people have noted this. It can be a little clunky at first, but really it's just a different metaphor for the same creation process. Almost all of these types of devices end up doing really similar stuff. You just have to understand what a sequence is, and you have to understand how to use this user interface. It's a little bit more abstracted than some other devices, but it is equally or more functional. When I say more functional, I'm really talking about the fact that although there's only 4 effect slots per track, there are so many really cool effects, some of which are paid, but most of which are free, that let you take even just a basic sample loaded as a key group across all the keys, add a filter, add chorus, add granulator, stutter. There's all these effects I've grown so used to using that when I don't have them on other devices, I feel the lack of them. Even in a platform like Ableton or Logic on iPad, there are just some things that are very simple to do that can transform any of the sounds that are on the device or anything you bring in through expansions or through samples or however. Add on top of that, this is basically the only standalone platform that has a vocal suite. Other devices have elements of a vocal suite, but this has a harmonizer, pitch correction, which is real time, and just a bunch of other things that allow it to be kind of an all-in-one production studio that other devices feel like they are not, or in a way that is dissimilar to other devices that feel like you hit a cap earlier. Now, it doesn't have a traditional arranger, but people have pointed out that not only can you use the song mode to sequence, you can also then create one big sequence out of that and then create automation across your very large sequence and then export that as stems if you want to. So there are definitely ways to make whole songs on here in the box without using it in controller mode or without exporting your stems and finishing them in a different piece of software, which is generally what I do. So looking on the back of this device, you can see similarities and differences from other MPCs. This one does not have an Ethernet port, but it does have Wi-Fi. It has a single USB-A port. It has an SD card slot, which the Key 61 did not have, but it does not have a SATA bay for an expansion drive. You can see actually I have a SanDisk USB. It's both USB-C and USB-A plugged in. I just took this out of the 61 and put it into the 37 and it just worked, which is pretty cool. Although I did have a bit of an issue authorizing the plugins I owned. It took like 4 or 5 hours for them to actually let me authorize them. I put in a support ticket and then they started working before they even responded to the support ticket. And looking online, other people had that issue too. Not a lot, but some people have had that issue. So I was glad it's self-resolved, but it was a little weird and worth noting. But yeah, I never use CV, but CV's here. There's a lot of inputs and outputs. I use an XLR adapter to 1/4 inch if I want to plug in a microphone. I have like, it plugs into my microphone, my dynamic mic on one side, and then it's a 1/4 inch, you just plug it in, and then you can record directly in with a microphone. You can also use audio interfaces, but I've never had good luck with that. Talking about this specific MPC is interesting, because like I said, most MPCs are essentially the same hardware platform. This one has 2 gigs of RAM, the Key 61 has 4, and the MPC X SE has 4. I personally didn't think that Akai was going to stick with a small amount of RAM. Before the MPC 1 Plus came out, I assumed that every new MPC after the 61 would have 4 gigs of RAM, but they've continued to put 2 in their lower cost models. And I have multiple feelings about this. On one hand, on paper, 2 gigs of RAM is a hilariously small amount of RAM in 2024. On the other hand, in practice, I've never had an issue with RAM on any MPC I've ever used. Loading projects and loading plugins was a little bit faster on the 61 compared to this one, compared to the MPC 1, but it's not slow enough that I feel like it's worth paying more to get the bigger one, especially if you like the form factor, which is such a huge selling point to me. The form factor of this device is so cool. There's really just nothing else like it. Now, there are devices that have a lot more RAM. There are devices that have more RAM but still struggle. Like the Machine Plus is a device I really like. It's actually back there, and it has 4 gigs of RAM, but it's running software that was clearly designed for more RAM, and so it struggles. The MPC, by comparison, has always been designed to have the amount of RAM it has, and so every new plugin and every new update that Akai rolls out is targeting this spec. And it reminds me a lot of the iPhone versus Android like 7 years ago, where the iPhone would have like 1 or 2 gigs of RAM and Androids would already have like 4 or 8. And people would be like, how do you do anything on an iPhone? But if you're optimizing your software for a single specific target specification and you're building the software and the hardware in tandem, you get to decide how much hardware your software needs. And so honestly, I think it's fine. And it's cool in some ways because it means that if you bought an MPC a few years ago and new ones are coming out with basically the same hardware, you're probably not going to be left behind anytime soon. Don't hold me to that. I don't have insider information, but it would be insane for them to sell this spec this year and to sell the MPC 1 Plus last year and then abandoned the 2 gig models in even the next 3 or 4 years, right? And so where I thought Akai was gonna leap into a competing space with Ableton and Native Instruments, it seems like they're staying in their own lane and focusing on power price balance and a cohesive ecosystem of a shared hardware platform and then a software platform that they can sell more plugins on, which frankly is a pretty cool way to do it. And if we talk about like the specs that are in really old Korg Tritons or workstation keyboards or other devices like that, I don't necessarily think a piece of music hardware has to compete with PC and Mac hardware. If they introduce a bunch of plugins that run like crap on here, or if they introduce a model that has like 8 gigs of RAM and can run twice or 4 times as many simultaneous plugin devices, that's where I feel like we would start to really feel the limitations of a 2 gig device. But it seems like they're really focused on making sure all of their devices run all of their plugins and software well. And frankly, from a consumer standpoint, I actually think this is pretty cool. By making the upgrades more about form factor rather than spec upgrades, they've taken a really interesting approach that I don't feel like I've seen before. And honestly, I think it's paying off. Not to just sound like a fanboy, I think it's a cool thing. As much as I also think the Ableton Push 3 at $2,000 is like a futuristic generational leap ahead is really cool. The fact that a young person or just someone getting started or someone who doesn't have access to $2,000 plus all the money for software can buy a device like this for $900 brand new, or an MPC 1 Plus or an older MPC 1 for even $400 or $500 and still have a very powerful platform. This is why competition is so good. This is why I really like seeing so many people in this space. And this is why I want to highlight when people are doing cool stuff on my channel. And I think this is cool. So to wrap this video up, I'll show you a beat or like a little bit of a loop of a beat I started last night. It's pretty basic, but hopefully it shows some of what you can do with this thing. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much to everyone who's liked and subscribed and who's checked out my music. Y'all are the best. I hope you have an awesome week ahead. Here's this little beat, and I'll see you soon. Thanks again for watching. Y'all are the best. You make this channel worth doing. If you are interested in picking one of these up, use my link from zZounds. Helps the channel out. And if you want to buy it somewhere else, by all means, I appreciate however you do that. And if you don't buy it, that's also super cool. I'm not a salesman. I just show stuff I like. Anyway, thanks for being great. Thanks for being awesome. Like I said, I hope you have a wonderful week ahead. And I'll catch you soon. you.